Hello everyone, my name is Katie Antoniuk and I'm here to deliver some good news. With the Supreme Court case, Brown versus the Board of Education decided everyone living in the United States can now attend any high school regardless of their race. Brown versus the Board of Education was a landmark United States Supreme Court case in which the court sought for and declared state laws that having separate public schools for whites and blacks was not constitutional. The Plessy v. Ferguson decision of 1896 stated that there could be state-sponsored segregation, but the Warren County thought differently. As a result, racial segregation was ruled a violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. This was a huge step and a major victory of the civil rights movement. The years leading up to the Brown case were horrible, and race relations in the United States had taken over by racial segregation. The Plessy v. Ferguson case held that as long as the separate facilities for the separate races were equal, that the 14th Amendment was not violated and that it was okay. In Topeka, Kansas, whites and blacks went to separate schools. Oliver L. Brown's one goal was to change this. Brown's own daughter had to walk 6 blocks just to get to her bus stop and then be driven to an all-black school, even though there was a all-white school 7 blocks from her house. In 1951, a class action suit was filed against the Board of Education of the city of Topeka, Kansas, in the United States District Court for the District of Kansas, and the 13 plaintiffs were parents of their 20 children. They wanted to get rid of the school district's policy of racial segregation. Oliver was one of the parents and one of the plaintiffs that was head of the roster and that tried to change this policy. In the spring of 1953, the court heard the case but could not decide the issue since there was no contention of gross impurity, and then asked to hear the case again in the fall of 1953 to figure out if the 14th Amendment actually prohibited having separate public schools for whites and blacks. There was a supremacy clause because the U.S. government realized that this was a controversial issue and that it affected all states and that it needed to be changed. The judges in court are not allowed to be emotional about cases and have to follow the due process to try and see if the case is breaking the law or is included in the Constitution. For the Brown case, the Supreme Court had to complete a judicial review and find out if the 14th Amendment banned having separate schools and if the case was constitutional. While all but one justice rejected segregation, the Judicial Restraint Group was trying to decide if the Constitution allowed the court to end the case. Warren was one justice, a judicial activist who did not believe in segregation and stated that the court needed to overrule the Plessy case. He then spent some time trying to get more and more people to agree with him. The final result was decided on May 17, 1954, and that was when racial segregation in schools is not allowed anymore. Even though segregation was not completely abolished, this case was a huge step towards complete desegregation in public schools. If the Brown versus Board of Education case was not decided, we would probably be still going to separate schools. Even though there were others during the time trying to change the racial segregation policy, the case was a huge step in history. We are the younger generation, and we need to learn that everyone is equal and should be treated equally, and that's how there will be peace in the world.